Hello, I am Brandon K. Hedgepeth, and as the host of this show, I want to cordially invite you to the Tansson Talk show, where our mission here is to bring people together. I always love doing this show, and I'm very excited to welcome my guest here today, Reed James. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me, of course.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you on. And so, first of all, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I am doing quite well. I'm just, really excited, for this day, the first, podcast after finishing my master's degree. I'm just so excited to speak with you.
Well, I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, and so before we get started, if you're able to introduce yourself for the watching or listening audience here today.
Okay, sure. I always find it hard to sum myself up in some ways because, you do so many things in your life and trying to sum it down to just a few, like a sentence or so is difficult. But I studied at the University of Leicester. I've got about a month left technically in my course, but I've handed all my work in. So it's kind of a transitional phase where I guess I am still a student, but really I'm done. In the UK, you just wait like months after handing in your work to graduation and you're in a weird limbo zone. I finished my work waiting to graduate, previously studied abroad in the US at Old Dominion University, and currently I'm the I'm going to be the next community and wellbeing officer at my students' union in the next, from when I graduate, essentially. So that's kind of who I am in short.
Well, I love that, and I'm just so excited, like I said, to start with the conversation. And so, yeah, so first of all, so I know this is your final year of your studies, and you said just a month left, but you finished all your assignments. So how does it feel to be, to be done for the most part?
It was a great liberating feeling. I think the worst part of being a student that I love writing, don't get me wrong. And I want to do a master's degree at some point. For reference, it's my undergraduate that I've finished. But that's going to be a few years down the line. I think it was a liberating feeling because, as a student, I think the worst thing is you're on the clock 24 hours, you're never really off. And, if you're someone who wants to get, decent grades, often, you can take lots of time off and then you feel guilty about it in some ways. You feel like, oh man, I could have spent this time studying. So it was nice to be finished. Wow, I've got time to catch up on all the things I've been putting off that I just don't have time for that. So because if you're a student, like me, you spend all day working and then you've got classes and then you've got extracurriculars outside of that. So you spend the entire day doing things. So it's actually hard to find like a block of time to really sit down and start some of the really complex things in your life. So it was nice to have the time to really spend that. It's been nice to spend days just doing things that I like doing, reading books, hanging out with my friends, right? Being like, oh, I've got to get back early to do this essay, or this is due, or that's due. So it was a great feeling and really nice.
I 100% understand that, and as someone who, like I said, just finished myself as of recording this a few days ago, not even a week, it feels very liberating, to know that you have time for yourself and to
Mm.
actually, like you said, like to see people, be with friends, finally read a book that you don't have to analyze, and so yeah, I completely understand that.
Yeah, so it was nice to do that and just be able to, I suppose, move on with your life too. Because I've been studying for at the university level for 4 years now. So yeah, I definitely want to continue that with a masters, but for now, I need a break. So that's one of the reasons I'm looking forward to my job. Apart from the fact that I love it, is just the fact that weirdly enough, doing a 9 to 5, I think I'll have more time for myself than I do being a student. Because at least I'll have the evenings free to focus on the things that I want to focus on rather than having to be like, oh, now I've got to go in and write this essay. So yeah, it was a really nice feeling, and I'm looking forward to getting on with the other things that I've been holding off in my life. I can't drive, for example. I mean, it does not so as important as the UK because you can walk around and take public transport everywhere, but still, finding even the time to do that is difficult. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking forward to.
That makes perfect sense. And yeah, and before I backtrack to your studies, I did want to ask for those tuning in. So, what is your upcoming position coming up, and are you able to tell us a little bit about it?
Sure, yeah. So I'm the first and probably last one actually, because basically my students' union is going for like a restructuring process at the moment, where they look at their constitution is about 100 years old from this year, and they've never ever updated it. Like they've added things to it, but they've never actually sat down and been like, okay, what's here? Do our structures work? And so they've got this company that's done an entire consultation for a year on it, and come up with some pretty significant recommendations. But while that's going through, they've been like, okay, we know some of the problems already. So my role is a new role, community and wellbeing. So I suppose one of the misconceptions about it is everyone just hears the well-being part. They're like, well-being, that's your entire job, and you're like a social worker. You're someone I should come to if I've got like a problem at the university, and that's not the case. So basically, it's a role where, in terms of well-being, so that's the first part. You represent student views on well-being to the university and try and improve well-being services within the students' union itself, because the union offers a degree of wellbeing services and kind of fills some of those gaps that the university doesn't do, like counselling or mentoring and stuff like that. So that's the first part, is representing student views and fighting for whatever students want to fight for, obviously better services, so on. Second part of it, this is kind of the transitional stuff where they're not quite sure where to put some of this stuff and they're waiting for the consultation, but they know it needs to be somewhere, is also you're in charge of sustainability. So anything to do with, climate change on campus and how the university should be tackling that. You're kind of in charge of that. And also volunteering groups as well, whether that's, sustainability groups or humanitarian groups or legal groups that want to, and if anyone that wants to do anything voluntary, you're also kind of in charge of those student groups and will deal with them and help them develop on campus. So it's kind of three parts. Next year, I've already been told that my job's going to change again. And it's going to be more about general student experience and stuff like that, because that's what the consultation's shaping up as. But that's going to be it for the year, and that's pretty exciting. It was a position you had to get elected for. And that was the hard thing. Not as hard as getting the US visa. I still say that was the hardest thing I ever did. But getting elected was pretty tough too. So yeah, that's kind of what the role is. It's a year long. You have the options to do another year, and then you have to go. You can only do 2 years.
Well, that definitely, like I said, sounds really interesting. How does it feel being like the first one in the position, and as you said, potentially the last?
It's a weird feeling, because I got elected into it, and then a month later, they're like, "Oh yeah, your position's getting axed already," and they've only just started it. But it was amazing, because it was something I never thought I'd be able to do. It was never something I ever wanted to do. And I was like, just didn't think it was. I didn't think I could get up there. You have to get elected for it. And the student body is about 26,000 people. That's a lot of people. Obviously, the voting share is a lot less than that. It's about 4,000 votes. But still, putting yourself up for election, especially in a students' union, is actually, I think, the worst kind of election. Because, if you seek election to politics, at Congress, city council, there's a degree of impersonality. A lot of times people just vote down the ballot for whatever party they like. They don't really, I think it's estimated that maybe 5 to 10%. Depending on the country, care about who the candidate is. Most people will just be like blue tick, red tick, whatever. They don't really care. But with students' union politics, most people know who you are. They've heard of you, and so it's a lot more personal. People are either very vigorously for you, or some people are vigorously we hate this guy, we despise him, we don't want him at all. So it was definitely a difficult campaign for that reason, because it is so personal. You really are putting yourself out. It is about you. There's no party behind you. There's no this. It's all about what you've put together as a campaign, your record, your things. And I never thought I could do it until, weirdly enough, when I went to Old Dominion and I became the finance director for SGA. Good fun, and I realised, I actually do enjoy doing student representation and helping students. And I was like, well, if I can do it here, I could probably do it in my own country as well, couldn't I? So then that just gave me the confidence to be like, actually, I would like to do that. And then after that point, it was just spending the next year talking to people, building up a campaign thing and doing it. And even after doing it, it didn't sink in. It still felt like, wow, I can't believe I actually did that, because I never thought I could win. I don't believe I'm going to win in any election, which is helpful in some ways because it makes you want to fight for every vote. You're not taking anything for granted. But on the other hand, you're spending the entire campaign crippled with self-doubt and being like, I'm not going to win. I'm not going to win. Even though everyone told me I was going to win, even my opponent was like, Reed, you're going to smash me, man. I was like, I don't think that's true. I think you're going to, get me. And then it happened, and I did eventually win by a landslide, and it just felt amazing, which I still didn't even believe it till I think it was the next week. They sent the university news update, and my face was on there along with the other people who've been elected. And I was like, okay, wow, now it feels real. I'm on an official university newspaper. So it's amazing. And I start in about a month. It starts on June 1st, or at least a training. And I'm so excited to start. It's a dream job because I like jobs that help people at the end of the day. I don't really care what it is as long as I can say this is a job that makes a positive contribution to society. And this is a job that obviously can do that in a lot of different ways. You're representing students on very important issues and helping student groups develop and stuff like that. And that's really exciting. And also being at the helm, I suppose, at a very exciting time too. The university is going through a huge constitutional change. So I suppose in some ways it makes it extra exciting, really, to kind of have to lead the transition on that because as one of the elected officers, you are, I suppose, the top person at the students' union. You represent the students, so it's exciting to be in that role in such an important time, really, as well. Even if at the end it's going to come to an end, and then I'll have to decide: do I want to run again, or do I want to step down, and that's it. But we'll see.
That's actually, like I said, really fascinating to, I mean, to hear about that, and I'm so glad that you're positioned as the finance director at Old Dominion University (ODU). Was able to help build your confidence for that, and I know, like in running for for this, not only did you have to sell yourself, that you also have to sell the new position as well.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Which I never thought of doing before. I mean, SJ was just kind of something I think I just got into because, like, I've always done student representational stuff, but like I never put myself forward for like a high position or anything. I always just did like a little thing, like a bit, like I think I was a mentor in my first year in the students' union. My second year, I ran like two political groups, but it was never really something I got into, and I don't know. I just by that point, I remember just getting to the US and being like, I should probably try and do a bit more, shouldn't I? I'm always taking on these little roles. I probably should do a bit more. And then ended up taking the finance role eventually and thinking, oh, well, I guess I'll give this a go. I guess I'll just go for it. And then, yeah, it just gave me the confidence really to do it. And that's what it's all about, really. It's all about confidence because at the end of I think the key thing you need to, I suppose, want to get elected is you have to believe you're the best candidate. And you have to be confident that, if you hear someone say something bad about you, that you can just take it and you can be like, okay, well, I don't think that's true because I know I'm the best. I know what you said about me is not true. Because you get all kinds of things in student politics. People can be very, very brutal and people can make up all kinds of lies and people will say anything, And one of the candidates I was speaking to, Shannon, she ran for union president for reference, she experienced like total misogyny on the campaign trail. Some people being like, how can we elect a woman which is, you wouldn't imagine that in a university, amongst students of all people who tend to be the most progressive people in society. But yet there were people who were misogynistic against her. So you really do get all kinds of stuff, or even just outright lies. On the campaign trail, there was members of the LGBT society, for example, going around telling people I was homophobic, to give one example, when I'm bisexual and I've dated men before. What are they talking about? But these things will just happen. People will just make up lies and do anything to try and get you. So you really do need confidence to be able to do it. And I'm always going to be thankful that SJ gave me that confidence to actually be like, not just put myself forward, but stand up for myself and keep going. Because when you hear stuff like that, some people I know dropped out. Some people are like, oh, I can't take the heat from standing for election. But for me, I was just like, just have to keep going. So no, that's not true. And I suppose that's the nicest thing I really learned about the student body is most people, there are always going to be people that don't like you or whatever, but most people are really nice and reasonable and lovely. And for the most part, I'd say it was one of the nicest campaigns I ever did, because I do a lot of professional door knocking and stuff for political parties, and people can be really mean on the doorstep. But most students are actually really nice and pleasant and love being talked to compared to people. So actually, it's quite nice, You get a fair hearing, and like on the doors, well, often you'll knock on someone's door and someone will be like, "Get off my property," and then they'll really. When the first door I knocked on, someone called the police on me. So just knocking on their door and asking what party they were going to vote for. So it's actually quite nice by comparison.
Wow. And I guess before like I said, backtrack a bit. First of all, that's really interesting. I mean, to hear about your story with that and how toxic a campaign for for student government of all
Mm,
things can be. Even as someone who's been through you know a university students, and I mean, and I can know, of course, a little bit as to the insides of that, but I never even realized it could be that toxic, at least from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, it can be. I think in some ways, often it's worse actually. The toxicity because there's less checks. I suppose there's less. If I'll give you, if say the UK member of Parliament said something about someone, there'd be fact checkers on it, professional fact checkers. There'd be people online taking a look at it and being like, "Well, that's not true." There'd be Twitter community noted. There'd be checks on them. The people being like, "Well, that's not true. There's a degree of like standards in public life that people accept as, for the most part, especially in the UK in my case, if someone says something that's blatantly not true, people will call that out, be like, that's a load of nonsense, provide evidence. But in like the lower you get, there's less checks, less people willing to hold people accountable because it's just less people. And so often like someone's like personality and like personal power can mean a lot more, I suppose, and they can sway a lot more people quite easily. So there's a lot more room for people to be toxic and just say whatever without anyone really being able to do anything about it. And that goes for my experience in the UK and also my experience, I suppose, in, Old Dominion and stuff. Student politics was equally as toxic there for different reasons. But, I think it's just an aspect of politics, really. And I suppose there's a thing of politics. If you're going to be in it, you have to be willing to accept that some people are just there to kind of wreck stuff. Some people only are there to oppose and not really do anything, and you just kind of have to get through that. Really, my experience.
Well, at least you were able to persevere, through it and get to the position that you were hoping for. I suppose in two different countries actually, and and so definitely kudos for that and for being able to to stick it out and to provide a little bit of more accuracy within what was being said.
Yeah, no, definitely. That was it. I suppose that was the nice thing, really, is, because you think these things are going to be big things. I remember when, say, that came out about the homophobia, I was like, oh no, everyone's going to think that. How can I, obviously the first word counts in politics. That's one of the things I learned was like, oh, whoever gets the first word out often, that's it. It's the first thing someone believes. And if someone says, oh, X person is sexist, or although on instinct you believe them, as you should, because I think in most cases, someone says an allegation of that severity, it's often true. In my case, it is often true that that's what's been said and so on. But what was nice about, I suppose, the campaign as I learned on, I thought, oh, this is it. This is the end. Is most people, when they found out, were like, well, how is that possibly true? Because they even knew me and were like, well, I know who he is. He's dated men before. He's part of the LGBT society. Many of his friends are gay. That's nonsense. Or they'd just be confused and be like, why is this, how is this being said without any evidence? Where's the evidence? Of course, there was none. But it's, a smear campaign by other people who want to get elected. So, yeah, often these things can happen. But, got through it, as you said. Realized some valuable lessons, and I always tell people this now when some of my friends are considering standing for election, which is, don't worry about the smears, because often, regardless of what is said, unless you've actually done something wrong, well, in most cases, people either don't care, well, they will ask for evidence, they'll either know you of character, or I suppose for the most part, information, travels very slowly, So often you don't need to worry. You just need to focus on being a positive candidate, putting yourself forward, and that'll matter more than anyone's negative character assassination of you, unless it's obviously true, in which case it probably will matter.
Yeah, well, you certainly do have that, that caveat at the end, but but backtracking a bit though. So I know, of course, while right now you are in your, final year study, so so to take a step back, where you currently study, is that where you always had, wanted to be, and same with studying history and politics, is that always what you wanted to do?
No, not at all, actually. So I finished high school. I was never really a good student at high school, is the funny thing. Unlike now. So I'm trying to think of the US equivalent. I can't think of it. But basically, when you're in the UK, you do GCSEs, which are like qualifications or whatever. And I came out with like two of them: history, funny enough, English, and philosophy and ethics. Basically, the subjects I was interested in which are good, but to get into most places, you need 4 or 5, sometimes 6. So I was like way behind. I wasn't too interested. I only did well in the subjects I cared about. I didn't even know what I wanted to do. I had no idea. So one of the other things I ended up doing when I was at my high school was next to a college, which in the US, you guys go straight to high school to university. We have a bit of a stopgap really, where you go to like college or sixth form to get some more qualifications, like another 2 years worth, and then when you're 18, you go to university. So you leave high school at 16. And my university was next to one, so they had a transition deal where instead of doing a GCSE or two, you could do like one of their courses. So I did like plant-based studies, which I found relatively interesting. And then when I finished high school, I was like, well, I guess I'll just do the next level. I don't know what I want to do, so I guess we'll just do that. Did that for a week when I started and realized, I don't really like this very much. Looked around for some other courses at the college, found animal care, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll do animal care. Did that for a year, figured out I didn't like that very much. So then I was like, okay, well, what do I want to do? Looked around for some courses at colleges because I couldn't get into a sixth form because you needed GCSEs for that, which I didn't have. So I ended up doing health and social care because I was like, well, I like society stuff, right? I like helping people. I'll do health and social care. That sounds interesting. Still don't know what I want to do. And then a few months into my studying, I realized I want to go to university. I want to do history and politics. I think I just started reading like history books at some point randomly and just ended up falling in love with it. And I was like, well, okay, that's what I want to do now. And getting into like politics locally as well, like helping out my local Labour Party and stuff. And I was like, hey, well, I actually want to get involved and do things and I want to study it. So I had to bear it out. I had to do 3 years of studying at college, health and social care to do it, along with my other year doing animal care. So I spent 4 years studying at college to do it, to get the actual grades to get into university, because you could get in with like equivalents, but you had to do, because I had to do the one below GCSEs first because I didn't have enough, and then I had to do the next level. So I had to do a whole bunch of stuff to get in. So basically spent 4 years figuring out what I wanted to do and getting the qualifications, got into university. And then, yeah, it's been exactly what I wanted to do ever since, really. But it took a lot to get there, which in some ways I think was beneficial. I think one of the things I've learned from that is I think sometimes we kind of rush people across the path. It's easier in some ways in US universities because you have majors and minors. You can kind of like do one thing and then do another thing. But in the UK, it's like a fixed course. You do history and politics and that's it. And I learned that actually it's quite good that I came late, because sometimes we rush people into just going into education again and again, when I really did benefit from that time to think about what I wanted to do and try loads of different things before I figured out what I liked doing. And that was good because it meant I got into the course I wanted and I was willing to study hard and do it, compared to some people I've met along my journey who are at university just because, and they don't know what they want to do. And then by the end of it, they've got a degree that isn't worth very much because they haven't got very good grades. And then they don't even want to go into their degree field. And they're thousands of pounds in debt now and money. And it's just like, yeah, I wish, there wasn't that immediate expectation, because for some people, obviously, they know immediately what they want to do, and that's great. But some people don't know. And I definitely know that I don't think I could have gone to university at 18. I'm glad I waited till I was 20 because it gave me the time to think and also be mature enough to be like, I actually want to study and get decent grades and, explore university to its fullest. So, a lot of people go into university and they kind of don't do anything for their first year. That's like a very common thing that I learned in my mentoring stuff, is a lot of people don't do anything in their first year. They just kind of go to classes, do a bit of socializing and don't get too involved. For me, immediately, I was like, I'm going to get into student union politics. I'm going to get into academic representation. I want to go and do stuff, So, yeah, so it hasn't always been what I wanted to do, but when I picked it, when I got in, it's been great ever since. And
Well, I'm glad at least that you were able to have that time to sort of explore without, being committed to, to a program and just have to, commit all the way through and not enjoy what you do. So I like that you had, that opportunity. And to answer what you're saying at the beginning, I'd say a U.S. equivalent from the way you described the GCSE would be like our SATs.
yeah,
Um,
that sounds right.
but overall, when you finally, did enter university, like, how did it feel for you having, you know, at least a clearer path as to like what you wanted to do and meeting people and trying new experiences?
Oh, I suppose it was weird at first, to be honest, because I was the one of the generation that came in during COVID. So for me, almost funny enough, I feel like my first year didn't even exist. Like, I mean, it did. I did stuff. I got into like debating society because that could have been online. Obviously, you just need a Zoom link and that's it. In some ways, it's better too because you can mute people if they're annoying or over speaking on time, which you can't do in real life. You have to so I got into like debate society, got into like academic representation. I was like a course representative on my course to like the university and stuff like that. But for the most part, it was online. You met some people who were in like your dorm and so on, but yeah, it definitely didn't feel like compared to some people's crazy first years that I really had one. It was just kind of there. Second year was more of my first year in some ways, which was great. You know, that felt like the university experience and had a great time. But yeah, it was definitely a weird. It was a weird start, but eventually led to me, obviously, I suppose, hitting it off immediately, knowing immediately what I wanted to do. You know, and whether that was getting into student politics, getting good grades, doing study abroad. That was also another thing that I remember wanting to do, which is why I picked my university because I was like, I really want to study somewhere else. That sounds kind of fun. My university offers one of the best study abroad courses in like the country because most universities in the UK they offer like very like strict like oh you can only study in like 2 or 3 countries and I didn't want to study in Europe. I wanted to study somewhere Canada, US, Australia, and my university was like you can study in like 60 different countries and if you name it you can probably study there, you know, Taiwan, South Africa, Korea, Japan. So I was like, oh, this is great. It's exactly what I wanted. And it's just because I realised I wanted to do as much as possible at university. And if that meant study abroad, that's great because that sounded really interesting. And since then, it was really interesting. And I have to say, out of all the years I spent, it's weird because I now work as a student ambassador part time till the end of my studies. You kind of sell the university to people coming into it on like open days and stuff, or I think in the US, it's open house days. And it's weird to say that actually my favourite time at my university was when I wasn't there because study abroad was fantastic. Not so much like the academic side of things, but just like the personal development, that confidence again. It's just why I recommend it to everyone because I'm like, if you can live in another country by yourself and make it and have a good time, then you could do anything. And after that point, I feel like that, as well as SGA, that set me on the course for what I wanted to do now because I was like, well, if I could do this, I could do anything. You know, I just need to just do it. So just always recommend people to push themselves and try things. You know, my friend has a nice saying, it's like, if it's scary, you should probably do it. And often that's the kind of thing that I've lived by whenever I feel scared. I'm just like, well, I should just do it because, you know, what's the worst that can happen? You know, another good one is you have to think about things in cost and benefits. You know, if it doesn't work out, what happens? Well, in study abroad, it was like, well, I can just end it early and go home. Probably even have time to start my degree on time anyway because study abroad starts like a month and a half before my course starts. But if it does work out, then think how much you'll benefit. So it's that kind of things, really.
Well, certainly, I love that that you were the one of the reasons that you chose your university was to be able to study abroad, and that's really cool that there's so many different opportunities available, and so from starting from the beginning with that. How far into your university studies were you when you started your study abroad process?
I suppose for me, in my head, it was before I even got there. I was looking out in my university's talks for study abroad opportunities, found my university, went to the study abroad talk at the open day, and my mom was like, "You're never going to do that." And I was like, "No, trust me, I am." And then had to wait a year because you can't apply in your first year. Second year, you can apply. I applied on the first day, got my application in, wrote it all. Was super excited. Had like the worst thing in the world happen after that because I remember I was actually giving a speech at student council that before. And I gave a terrible speech because the second before I got up, I checked my emails and it was a thing with study board saying applications have been denied. And I was like, oh my god, this is the worst thing in the world. So I gave a terrible speech because all I could think about was getting away. Got out, rang them up randomly, and they answered at like 6 o'clock. I don't know why that happened in retrospect. I was like, I can't want to wait till the morning. And they were like, oh yeah, we didn't receive your like personal statements. We denied you automatically. And I was like, I know I put that in. I know I did. It must have been like an IT error. And then they looked and they were like, we think there's been some kind of error. So you know what, if you just send it in now, just say it came in on time. I was like, thank God. Cause that was the worst thing. I mean, I would have got to go anyway. You know, I would have got to, going through clearance and stuff later, but you want to get in first because you get access to those premier destinations. So then after that, I obviously applied, application went through as normal. After that, you got to choose your destinations, which for me, I think I chose all the US at that point, really, which was mainly because I'd been there before. I did an internship in the US for a congressman one time, and that had already was about to come through. So I was like, well, I'll have familiarity with it already by doing this. So I might as well just go to the US and ended up picking Norfolk. Norfolk was my second choice, believe it or not, which nobody in Norfolk believed, but it was. My first choice was Chicago because that kind of sounded quite cool, being in a city. But that one got filled up immediately, which you'd expect. So number two was Norfolk because actually, as a study abroad location, it's quite desirable because you've got a lot of compared to some of the US. Norfolk's got pretty decent public transportation. I've got trains that can get me to New York, Richmond, DC. It's a city also, which is good. Because a lot of the destinations that I was offered were like in the countryside, middle of nowhere in the US. The university was the only thing there, and I was like, well, that's not going to be very good. Like, I don't be able to see much of the US. But because I went to Norfolk, I got to see loads of stuff. I ended up going to Boston, Charleston, Savannah, saw loads. So it paid off. And then, yeah, just got your things together. Had to apply for a US visa, which was the worst thing ever. Ever. It's just terrible, very non-inducive process to humans. Somehow made it through. And then there we were.
Wow, well, that certainly sounds like quite the extensive process. And yeah, and I mean, I thought you gave great answers to why you you know, chose Norfolk because I was thinking it's like out of all the places, well, here, don't get me wrong, I love our area, but but yeah, I mean, that's really cool that you were able to do that, and it sounds like you make quite a bit of visits, probably more than many of us who have lived here our whole lives.
Yeah, I mean, for me, study abroad's never ended. For unlike most people, I've slowly come to realize I had a pretty atypical study abroad experience, weirdly enough. Which I think, firstly, is just because I didn't stick in the expat community. Because it was every university has like an expat. There was a British expat community. There was like 12, 13 people at ODU who were British, and they mostly hung out and did various things. I never really got involved with those guys. I was more interested in let's go out and see the US for what it is and meet people and go to so I was like the only person in the expat community that had like a job. I had worked as like a desk assistant and eventually at SGA. I was the only person who joined like a student group. I joined obviously SGA, I joined MUN. I got involved with social things. Traveled everywhere. I think I was the only person who went to like an American's house, for example, even little things like that. Most of the guys would just stay at the dorms, obviously. I got to go to people's houses, which most people are like, you went to someone's house? So, yeah. And for me, it never ended because during that time, I ended up meeting my girlfriend there. She didn't go to ODU, she went to Regent. And yeah, we really hit it off, and that's never ended. So I'm in the UK at the moment, but she's here. She's come to visit me for summer. She's here from May till the end of August. Actually mid-August, and I came back. So my visa expired in May of last year. I came back in July to August. Then I came back for Christmas. And now she's here, and she's kind of trying things out. And if she likes it, she's going to move here next year. But obviously, now this has worked out. I have to, regardless if I end up over there or she ends up here, I'm going to have to keep going back to the US. I've already got a trip planned for Thanksgiving in November to come back to Norfolk. So, for me, study abroad's never ended.
I love that. Truly the trip that never ends. And definitely let me know when you're in the area next time.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it'd be hopefully around November if I can get it off with my work. But I'll let you know.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to that. And overall, well, actually, hold on. Before I even ask about what I was going to say, so since you mentioned that you actually got to stay at someone's house during your time here, so how did that come about? And overall, was there any sort of, shock or anything when you came into, a U.S. university? And overall, how was the experience over the course of that year?
Oh, that's such a big. I've got so many thoughts on that one. That's the killer question. It's really different. It's really different in every conceivable way of how the university is structured is different. I mean, academically, for example, I mean, UK universities, are, at least history and politics in my area, it's obviously different. In different areas, history and politics in the UK is all about, I suppose, making you think, making you do, and in your undergraduate degree, making you, give an independent answer and become your own historian. In my second year, my first lecture ever started with the head of the history department being like, "You're all historians now." It's like trying to empower us to be like, you can write your own stuff, you can research your own stuff. You're just as good as those famous guys. You can do it. So a typical UK question on history or politics might be, say, why did the fall of the Soviet Union happen? Tell us why. And they might give you a few books to research, but they'll also encourage you to go into the library and find your own books. It's all about encouraging you to be your own writer and write your own stuff. And it's all open-based essays. My entire degree is assessed by coursework, just all essays on various subjects, and that's it. The US is so different going into history and politics because obviously there are some essays where it's the same. They give you something and they say to this, but it's a lot more controlled and a lot more handheld, and it's a lot more about I suppose I'd say like literacy almost. Instead of a question about why the Soviet Union fell, they might give you a question like, this author says this reason is why the Soviet Union fell. Tell us what their argument was. And you'd read the book and you'd repeat it verbatim. And if you tried to go outside of that, incorporate something else, you'd get marked down. I remember I got marked down. There was a question on Christianity. I can't remember what it was. It was a question about why something happened in Christianity. You had to read a book about it. And I read the book and I gave my response, and I omitted some of the stuff in the chapters that I thought was irrelevant. And I got marked down for it because I didn't put that stuff in. I was like, but that's not relevant to the question at all. This one chapter has nothing at all to do with the question you wrote. And he was like, well, it doesn't matter. I want to see it in there. At that moment, I was like, okay, so it's not about what you think. It's about It's about literacy and just telling them that you've read the book. So it's very different. It's testing a different set of skills. And obviously, there's someone like me who's an independent learner. I found that constrictive, but equally, I could also see some of my friends who struggle to be independent learners in the UK in that regard. So in some ways, it can be helpful because they can, they're being handheld and, they're kind of guided into what they should be reading, and they don't lose course and do really poorly, because that can equally happen. The US, your professors are constantly checking up on your progress, telling you when work's due and stuff like that. Well, in the UK, most times they even announce the essays, so just expect you to have found when they're due and write them, and that's kind of it, really. So academically, it's an entirely different experience, which at least for me was easier. I will say, the UK is more challenging. I definitely grew a lot more as a writer. The US was a lot easier because, as well as essays, you'd have like multiple choice quizzes, and I suppose and even funner things too. You'd have stuff like write your own policy brief, which you wouldn't do in the UK. That kind of stuff I found really fun. I even had one module I was marked. You had to do like a role play as half the module, and you were graded on that. And I loved that. So as much as it was easier, it was also more fun. But I think you also academically got less from it. So there's pros and cons, right? But it was very different. But it different in a good way, because I enjoyed it, I suppose, more than in the UK, because as much as the UK is more rewarding, it is much harder. Academically, I mean, the entire university works very differently in just every way, whether that's like socially, even the small things, like I know British humor is very different from American humor, and then that one very quickly. Some of the things I would say in the UK that people would find funny, people would find offensive. That was a big one. Said so many accidentally offensive things that they just did not realize were not funny here in the US, because it just was so normal here. The way, even like SGA, for example, it's structured so differently than student unions. Student unions in the UK are like independent bodies. They're like completely independent. They employ their own staff. The student officers like me in a month are all employed by the union. Like, it's very much supposed to be like a blockade against the university if it needs to be. And if something happened, the union could act. It could withdraw funding from the university, withdraw contact, withdraw services. There's a lot of bargaining power, and they're generally set up to provide like a voice for the student specifically, and they fill a lot of the gaps. At least the one at SGA, I know some SGAs are different. At ODU, that one definitely felt more like technically it was set up to do those things, but equally it definitely felt more like a university like a thing for the university as well as much as the student, and if you get there in that regard, like as much as it was required to represent the student, also had a dual responsibility of like kind of being the university's cheerleaders, selling the university to like on open house days, turning up to like university events and being like, these are the students, elected to do things. And that's something that we, I suppose, never be expected to do in the UK. That's just not, we're not university cheerleaders. We represent the students. So that was different too. Getting used to like a different political structure. And I suppose also another thing too is just the extravagance of it, which is funny because ODU is actually a very poor university compared to a lot of them. But at least for me, ODU was like, there was just a lot more there. Like, the funding for student activities in Leicester, as someone who's on the funding committee, is somewhere about 60k, maybe 50k. When I was finance director, I mean, the budget was, I think it was 700k, a lot more. And that was low too. It used to be a lot higher. So almost a million, like 900. So that was, you go to student events and there'd be free t-shirts and there'd be loads of food, and comparatively UK stuff is like on austerity basically. There's not as much money to go around for student activities, which isn't always bad in some ways because it does lead to overspending. I'll never forget one student who was like, I can't run a student group on anything less than 10k. And I was like, yes, you can. And I run my student group in the UK on £200 and we work fine. But yeah, so yeah, it was very different in every way really coming into ODU, but by the end I adapted, and by the end I was missing it. So it was a great experience.
I love that. And would you say that you've been able to, like, how long would you say that it took for you to be able to, I mean, to fit in the sense of like, yeah, this is my university for the year. Like, this is my place.
I'd say like halfway through. Halfway through is I feel like when you've, because the worst part about studying abroad and the worst part about getting into ODU is the fact that you're like starting again. Everyone hate, you kind of have to talk to everyone to make friends. You don't have any friends. You don't really know where anything is or anywhere you should go. Like, it's nice coming into later years, as you'll all know, knowing that, okay, these are my friends. These are the clubs that I like going to, like, it's horrible having to just start all over again. And do that. So it took about halfway through the year to be like, okay, well, I've joined all these clubs. I've joined this club, and I like that club. I don't like that club. I like these people. I don't like that people, and establish myself. And by halfway through, it was fine. And there's always more to learn. The longer I stayed, the more I realized the small differences and stuff like that I didn't notice to begin with. But I learned to love it, and yeah, now I miss it. So that should probably tell you quite a lot.
Yeah, it definitely does. And yeah, before I continue forward, I did want to circle back to. So since you mentioned earlier, like you said, that you got to, like I said, stay in someone's house while you were in the
Mm.
U.S. So how did that come about for you? And was that like that from the beginning, or did that happen at some point in the midst of the year?
Yeah, I suppose that was the interesting thing is how open everyone was to just wanting to show you things. Like, I remember when Thanksgiving happened, and I had multiple offers to go around to multiple people's houses over Thanksgiving, and I had to choose very carefully because I didn't want to offend anyone, but I wanted to go around everyone's house, and that was a really nice thing, really, is that how welcoming everyone was. Whenever I wanted to go to an event that I couldn't get to because I needed a car, someone would offer to drive me. Whenever there was a big holiday that obviously I don't have any family for, I'd be invited. Someone would invite me. Even as people I barely ever met before would just be like, "Do you want to come with my family on this holiday so you're not left out?" So they came across quite naturally, really. And a lot of people would just want to show me things. I'd say, "Oh, I'm a exchange, study abroad student." They'd be like, "Oh, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this, da, 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 da." Also, I can take you to all these places if you want to see them. And some people will be like quite honoured. Someone took me to First Landing, and they're like, "Oh my god, I can't believe I'm taking someone to First Landing for the first time." So you kind of just got taken places, really. I didn't almost had nothing to do with it. It was more me just talking to people about who I am, and then someone would be like, "Oh, so you haven't been to Colonial Williamsburg before?" I'm like, "No," and they're like, "Let's go tomorrow." And we drive all the way up to Colonial Williamsburg, or like, someone would be like, "Oh, so you've never been in like an American house before?" And I'm like, "No, we'd like to go to my parents' house." And I'm like, "Sure," and we'd go there and spend the night there, and then go back to ODU the next day, and it just kind of worked like that. really, for the most part. We would just be like, oh, you haven't been to X place, let's go. So it came about really naturally, but also just because everyone was just so welcoming, at every stage.
I absolutely love that. And the one I do have to ask about though is how was your experience visiting Colonial Williamsburg?
Oh, I loved it. It's a really, really unique place. I've not really seen anything quite like it, where it's so open to the public. I really like that, because a lot of these historical places because Colonial Williamsburg is like a pseudo simulation of, like, the colonial times. At least it attempts to be. You've got people in costumes and stuff, but I really just like how open it is too. You have to like pay a hefty price. Obviously, you can if you want to go and see the stuff inside, but you can still get quite a lot by walking around and seeing there's a lot of free things there, and you've got people walking their dogs there and stuff. So I absolutely loved it, because there's nothing else I've seen like it, where you can just see so much for so little. And yeah, it was just a really great time. I went there multiple times. I think I must have been there maybe 3 times by the end, because first time was just kind of like wandering around. Second time was seeing everything I could for free, and then the last time I came with my girlfriend, and we paid to get into everything and see everything that time.
I really love that. And yeah, and so I guess how was it for you, after having adjusted for the whole year, going back home?
Um, Yeah, I mean, it was hard in some ways. The main thing, obviously, being seeing my girlfriend, I suppose. You established this whole relationship over there, and something I had to learn to do long distance. So it was definitely hard, and having to spend a lot of time, reconnecting with people you missed out on the whole year, coming back. I mean, I think I definitely had a softer landing than most people, because the worst part about studying abroad, obviously, is that your next year of friends, they move on, and often they move on and graduate. Um, but for me, at least, all my friends went on to do masters. Pretty much every single one, apart from one person, pretty much you went on to further study, or they just ended up living in the city anyway. So for me, weirdly enough, I think kind of stayed the same when I got back for the most part. So for me, I had quite a softer landing than most people. But I think from a lot of people, when you come back, it's quite, you have to start again. None of that should deter anyone, because I think you can always make new friends, as I have in this year. I came back and I made a lot of friends, and a lot of friends I wouldn't have met otherwise, because they wouldn't have been at the university yet, or they would have been in a different year. So it was hard, but I had a softer landing. And yeah, I mean, I suppose yeah, I think that's it really. It was difficult, but you just kind of got through it in the end. And I said it was kind of half and half really, because, then I went back for summer there, then I went back to here again. So it's kind of, you never had like a definitive end on it really, where yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And to sort of work to bring this a little bit full circle too. So I know, of course, that, both where you are at home and at ODU, that you are, of course, in student government. But I know that you
Mm.
also have a big experience in both countries, for the politics there. And so how was that, for you? Because I know you said that you worked with, I believe, a congressman back in the U.S. prior to your study abroad, and then
Yeah.
also for your political party there in the UK.
Oh yeah. Once again, there's the ODU question. It's very, very different in every conceivable way. In some ways for the better. So I suppose the things that I liked more, the things that I found like nice, was there was a greater level of like political education I found in the US, actually, compared to like, I'll put it this way: you meet a lot of people in the UK who you'll say, oh, don't vote, and you'll ask them why, and they just don't care. They just don't know anything, but they also don't. So they don't know why they don't want to vote, but they know they don't care, and that's kind of it. They couldn't really give you a reason. They'll just be like, I don't like politics. Politics isn't for me, and that's it. In the US, I don't think I met a single person who didn't vote, who didn't know exactly why they didn't vote, who wasn't like, X thing happened in politics, but they also knew what was going on at the same time. They might not want to vote. They might say, oh, I don't like Trump, I don't like Biden, but I know exactly what's going on with both of them right now. So I felt like people in the US were a lot more clued in into what was going on, and also a lot more passionate when they did want to tell me things. And that was also nice too, because in the UK, often knocking on doors can feel like getting water out of a stone. It's very hard. People don't want to tell you a lot of things. In the US, people are all too happy to tell you exactly where they stand on things, which is nice as a political canvasser. I remember the first time I canvassed in the US, in California, for my internship. Ended up canvassing there, and I think we knocked on how many doors, and we got like 10 people who said, "Yep, vote again, make it all the way down the line." I came back in the car and I was like, "That was amazing. That was incredible. I've never seen anything like that." The canvasser was like, "What are you talking about? It was terrible." I was like, "Oh, that's terrible. Oh, that was amazing. That was like the best ever." So yeah, people are a lot more enthusiastic, but it's also due to like the targeting too. Because in the UK, you don't know where the voters are, but in the US, people register obviously, so they only, political parties only target the people they know are either independent or on their side already, and just need that extra enthusiasm. Um, but obviously, there's a lot more money in politics too in the US, which is one of the negatives, which I definitely witnessed firsthand because working for my congressman in the UK, the candidate, whoever, the parliamentary candidate, they often do the same things that I suppose you do as the political activist. They'll come out on the doors, they'll knock on doors, they'll speak to people, they'll go to community events, they'll go to like the really poorly run party quizzes. They'll do all the things that you do, and whatever you do, they'll do. But in the US, there was definitely a separation between the congressman and the political activists because of like what the congressman just had to do, which was like, my congressman would just sit in a dark office all day and make phone calls to get money because he had to. He was facing a Republican billionaire who was self-financing. He didn't want to take any donations from big companies. And so he had to spend all day in a dark office or all evenings at a rich person's house trying to get money to raise $2 million in 2 months. Otherwise, he'd be out financed. And, you have to do it. But it sucks. And he hated it too for that, that reference. He was like, I'd much rather be at a community event or knocking on doors or speaking to people or just being out in the community. But this is the most effective use of my time. And I hate it, but it's true. And so that was the sad part, really, both for me and the candidate. So I think that all goes back to money. And obviously, as we know, Congress is very dysfunctional. And that's one of the reasons he thinks because of the needs of financing now, so many congressmen have to spend time, not in Congress doing their job, but in their constituencies trying to get money, and less time passing bills. And, that is a great shame. But yeah, it was definitely very different. I would say, but both good and bad in different ways. Both on like the enthusiasm front, but obviously the money obviously is just a lot more. I mean, I think there's a $2 million in 2 months. I think my parliamentary candidate's budget in a target seat was like £600 or something. It's just so small, and that makes the person much more. So yeah, it was very different, but I enjoyed both experiences. And in some ways, it's also not all bad, the money, I will say. The thing that does help in its own way is the fact that there's a lot more opportunities for people to enter politics in the UK and like make it their job. In the UK, political parties don't have a lot of money. So often there's not actually that many political jobs going. In the US, there were so many opportunities. I saw advertised for political interns to do this, political to do that, X, Y, Z. There's a lot of entry points for people to enter politics and start to make a career out of it if that's what they wanted. And that's nice because that is a lot harder in the UK because there's just not much money in politics. So a lot of the things that in the US people are paid to do, like canvass, or be on local councils, people are unpaid or get bursaries for in the UK. So, it's not all bad, even if I think for the most part, the amount of money in politics in the US probably doesn't help it.
That actually, yeah, it's so interesting to hear that, and especially the compare contrast from it. And definitely, I feel like stuff that both sides can learn for better or for worse. But out of curiosity, did your U.S. candidate actually win?
Yeah, so he won. Very marginal. He was in, I think, the most marginal seat in California. No Democrats won it by more than 51%. So yeah, he won by I think about the same margin as he did last time. I also did some work for Elaine Luria as well when I was over there in ODU, but she did not win. But that wasn't my fault. There were reasons.
Well, glad to hear it was not your fault. But nevertheless, though, I mean, yeah, having experienced, let's say, two different countries, very, you know, different cultures, and of course, now you are, just a few weeks away from, finishing up your final year of your studies, about to begin your time for your student union. So, what is next for you, Reed?
I suppose that's the big question and something I'm not entirely sure about because there's a lot of things to consider. The main thing is, to be honest, my girlfriend, because she's moving over here. But if she doesn't like it, I'll have to move over to the US to make the relationship work. So that's the first thing that leads me to a I don't know yet answer. So I'm not sure yet exactly which way it's going to go. It'll depend on how she feels in August. Presumably she does stay here and wants to be here in the next year. Then that's a further conversation I need to have. That's a question about, do you stay on for another year, or do you, go on to another job closer to home where I'd want to be with her? I don't know the answer yet. The one thing I do know is firstly a master's at some point. I definitely want to get my master's degree in public administration because that's the thing I want to go into. But most important thing I know I'll end up doing at some point is a job that helps people. And that's the most important thing for me, that I want to do some kind of job. I don't care what it is. As long as I can say it's made a positive difference, it makes me happy. So that's what's next to me. And that's either in the UK or in the US. That's what I'll end up doing, some kind of job in the public sector or charity sector, doing something that I just find really enjoyable, which is just doing jobs that just make a good difference to people's lives, whether that was you doing what I'm doing now or doing the financing, the SGA, which was rewarding its own way, making events happen for students that otherwise wouldn't happen. That was a great feeling. And I really loved that. So as long as it helps people, that's what I'll be doing.
I love that. And yeah, I'm so glad though that I said that that is overall your main mission, and I'm so excited to see you continue with that. And since you said at some point you do want to go for your masters, do you have a preference if you had to choose? I know you said it of course depends on you know somewhat on like your girlfriend's preference, whether she prefers there or or back home. But if you had to choose, where would you get your masters? Where you are in the UK or in the US?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I suppose if I had to choose, if I complete, let's pretend an arbitrary world where student debt doesn't matter. I think the US probably, just because I spent 3 years studying in the UK. I spent 1 year studying in the US. I suppose I'd like to see what the US experience is like and spend another 2 years there, just because it'll be different. It's also one of the things I like doing is just doing different things and putting myself out there. So if I had to choose, doing masters in the US would just be more interesting because it's just different. The UK, the masters is a continuation of undergraduate, and I'd just be doing the same thing for another 2 years, but in other something I'd want to do more. But US, it'll be completely different. So I think that would be quite exciting for me. So yeah.
Well, that sounds pretty cool. And out of curiosity, before we begin wrapping things up, is so outside of just, of course, your ability to like learn history and the politics of everything in your say, bro, what do you enjoy doing outside of all of that when it's whenever you're able to just have time for yourself?
Um, So outside of, I suppose recreationally, I suppose in some ways the same boring answer as everyone, would just, I like spending time with my friends, doing things with them. I like also just doing the stuff, recreation. I suppose like I like reading about politics, reading about history. I enjoy. I am one of the people who do enjoy my subject and do enjoy it generally. Um, Read fictional books, too. Recently read Lord of the Rings. That was quite fun. That kind of stuff, really. So just reading, being with my friends, watching movies, those kinds of things. I don't think it's anything too interesting. But I do have a life outside of this stuff, which is important because some people don't believe it.
Well, that's certainly good to hear. And like I said, I mean, this has just been so fun. Like I said, being able to hear about your experiences and what you've been able to do and accomplish. And you've accomplished quite a bit over the course of just a few years.
Yeah, my CV on my LinkedIn looks a bit crazy at the moment. Um, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's just because I've just taken the opportunities that are there, and that's the only thing I think I've really done compared to anybody else is just I didn't just be at university 3 years. I did study abroad. I didn't just do study abroad. I got outside the expat community, which some people really can stay in, and got a job, met lots of people, and you know did that kind of stuff, and I didn't just finish my studies. I was like, no, I want to take a leadership role at my university. But anybody can do that. You just got to be willing to take the opportunities that are there at the time.
I absolutely love that. Like I said, it's just been. I'm just so glad, like I said, that you're working to even be like well rounded, even what you do personally, and like I said, just work to to make a difference and to help people. And I think that's just truly commendable.
Oh, well, thank you, and it's been great to be here. This has been a really nice experience.
Thank you so much. And Lisa, and as we're beginning to wrap things up, I first want to ask, so for anyone who wants to potentially tune in and continue hearing your story or following you online, where are the best places for them to find you?
Twitter, Instagram, those are the two public ones that I do. Instagram is more like UK politics. Oh, so Twitter's more like UK politics. Instagram's more like kind of a bit of both, personal things that I'm doing. So those two are pretty good.
Oh, that's definitely good to hear. And before we end up in our final part, I did want to say, are there any questions that you have for me as we're still speaking here?
I did actually have one, and I was thinking about it the whole time, and I was like, well, I don't know if this is a good question to ask or not. But why is it called Tansson Talks? I'm just curious because it's not obviously your last name, so I was just curious.
Yeah, that is definitely a good question, and I've definitely been asked that a bit. But in terms of the Tansson name, it actually is a reference to my mom's name, and I am her son, and talks refers to it being a discussion.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Oh, yeah, it was just a curiosity because I suppose you would expect it to be your last name, so I was like, oh, wonder why it's called that. Then that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely have been asked that. Yeah, a few times, and I wanted a name that I thought was very personal to me, but did not have my actual name in it. And so because I feel like as much as don't get me wrong, I really love my name, of course, but at the same time too, my name would probably also be on everything that the company does, regardless. And so I feel like one, it'd be kind of redundant to have my name twice, and also too is that if I ever want to, I don't know, like retire, I don't want to have it where, obviously it's like, well, taking the person out of the name, I mean, out of the company with the person's name on it, I just thought that'd be so much of a hassle. As a forward thinker, it's just like, okay, what's something that's personal, but is not literally my name?
Yeah, it's also got a ring to it in some way, Tansson Talks, the two T's.
Yeah, I personally love a really good alliteration. But yeah, but like I said, Reed, this has just been, like I said, so fun being able to have this discussion, and I think it's only fitting to end out our episode by flipping this over to you. And what would there, and so to leave us out for this episode, what would you say are any piece of advice, life lesson, or whatever the case may be that you'd like to share? The floor is all yours.
Um, in just one little bit, I suppose I'll do the same. My friend said, if it sounds scary, just do it. Take the opportunities that are there, and just make the most of just what's in front of you. Really, because that's the only thing that makes me interesting. Really, is that I just took everything that was there that I could do at the time, and if you do that, you'll probably be pretty good. You're in a pretty good state too. You'll have experienced a lot and done a lot and done a lot more and experienced a lot more than some people ever get to do just because you did the thing that sounded scary.
I love that, and I think that's just so fitting to, like I said, bring this episode to a close. Thank you so much, Reed, for coming on the show and for speaking with us. And I just so appreciate you coming on, especially long distance.
Well, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, of course. And for those tuning in, thank you so much, as always, for tuning in to the Tansson Talk Show. I always appreciate your support. Continue tuning in every week as we continue on our mission to bring people together. See you next time. Take care.